This is the Virtual Artist Talk with Emily Earl. My name's Erin Dunn. I'm the Associate Curator of Modern Contemporary Art at Telfair Museums. And tonight we'll be talking about Late Night Polaroids, photographs by Emily Earl. All right. It is 6 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Telfair Museums today for our Virtual Artist Talk. My name's Erin Dunn. I'm the Associate Curator of Modern Contemporary Art at Telfair Museums. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Artist Talk for Late Night Polaroids, photographs by Emily Earl, on view at Telfair Museum's Jepson Center in the Art 912 Gallery, and it'll be on view through April 4th of next year. Just as a reminder, the museum is now open to the public, and our operating hours are Thursday through Monday at 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So I really hope that you'll have a chance to visit us soon. I want to thank everyone for joining us virtually, and while I wish I could see your faces, I'm glad we do have this format to bring us together and to talk about the work. Just a few housekeeping notes about Zoom. I'm going to introduce the exhibition and screen share a PowerPoint. If you have any questions during the talk, please put them in the chat box and I'll try to keep track and ask them at the end. During the PowerPoint, Emily is going to share some background on the project and the installation views that you're looking at, as well as descriptions of a few of the images. Afterwards, I'll ask Emily a few questions, followed by time for questions from the audience. In addition, the lecture will be recorded and available on the exhibition webpage and on Telfair Museum's YouTube page as soon as possible. First, I do have a few thank yous. I want to extend my thanks to my Telfair colleagues, Jessica Estes, Heath Rich, and Malutin Pavlovic. I also send my thanks to Harry DeLorme, who's been instrumental in updating our programming to this virtual format to continue to make it accessible to our members. And of course, I want to thank Emily for her incredible vision and dedication. It has been a real joy to work with you on this project. Late Night Polaroids is part of Telfair Museum's Art 912 program, which is dedicated to raising the visibility and promoting the vitality of artists living and working in Savannah. So over the past 8 years, Savannah-based artist Emily Earl has roamed the streets of Savannah with her Polaroid ProPack Camera to document the city's nightlife. Culminating in this solo Art 912 exhibition, the Late Night Polaroid series concluded this year when she finished her last pack of the discontinued instant film. Looking for subjects, Earl finds moments of darting eye contact and brazen body language on display. After capturing an image, an instantaneous print is produced, subsequently scanned in high resolution, and edited in Photoshop to make the sharp and detailed larger prints that are on view in the exhibition. Influenced by other street photographers such as Weegee, Brassai, Jill Freedman, and Walker Evans, Earl's portraits capture the energy of downtown after dark, creating an archive of inhabitants of Savannah's social scenes. Her work veers from the direct, sometimes unnerving eye contact to sly smiles and downturned glances from unaware patrons. There is an undeniable sensuality to Earl's images, the effect of black and white with an intense flash, causing light to glance off exposed fair skin or teeth as a mouth opens for a kiss. The viewer feels as if they might be intruding on an intimate moment, but the subject often seems to be inviting them to come a little closer. Exposed under the bold flash of Earl's cameras, these images give the viewer a glimpse into the characters and the drama that play out in the smoke-filled patios, bars, and sidewalks of Savannah at night. Today, Earl's photographs remind us of a way of life depicted as not only the end of a series, but the possible passing of a certain carefree lifestyle, as the photographs offer an essential rumination on a world untouched by social distancing. And now I'd like to introduce the artist. Savannah native Emily Earl documents the spaces and faces that make up her quirky, sultry city. She received her BFA in photography in 2007 from SCAD, and she's the co-founder of Sulphur Studios and its director of public relations and special events. She is also owner and operator of Prismatic Prints, a fine art print shop where she assists clients from creative concept to finished artwork. Work from Late Night Polaroids is included in the permanent collection of the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, Georgia, and has been featured by Polaroid and The New Yorker. I also want to quickly promote the catalog Late Night Polaroids that accompanies this exhibition. It was published and produced by Savannah-based publishers Ain't Bad, and it's available on their website. And $5 from each sale goes to National Bailout, a fantastic collective of abolitionist organizers working to end mass incarceration. That catalog is also available in Telfair Museum's gift shop if you're at the museum. So with all that, I want to thank Emily for joining me today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
And now at this point, I'm going to share a PowerPoint of some of the installation images from the exhibition and a few works that are included that Emily will give kind of a brief description about. And then I'll encourage you to keep these images in your head as we kind of talk through our questions today. One second. So the exhibition, as I mentioned, is on view through April 4th in our Art 912 lounge. And Emily, if you wanted to speak a little bit to some of the installation views.
Yeah, so this is a shot just as you're entering the hallway, leading towards the main space of the lounge. The text is actually my handwriting, which I also used on the cover of the book. So I thought that was really nice on the wall as a decal. On this side of the wall are some of the prints that I made from the original Polaroid. So those first three are 16 by 20 prints. And then there's some 11 by 14s also. These three images, oh sorry, were some of the first ones I ever made in the series. I believe I shot those three in like 2012 or 2013. So they really kind of helped me like find a way for the rest of the project.
And they also kind of act as an entryway for the viewers into this exhibition.
These four 11 by 14s over here are some of my personal favorites. They're a little quieter. Some of the photos are really like outrageous, people with these big attitudes. But I also really appreciate the kind of quieter moments with people. And then I also really wanted to show the actual original Polaroids. So there are 8 of these on the other side of the hallway, all in a line, matted, and you really kind of get a chance to see the original and how small that is. It's pretty itty bitty compared to the much larger prints. And then this is the main space, looking on the east wall. And these are the 24 by 30 prints that I made. So this is one of my favorite images from the whole series, probably. It was a really incredible moment. Sometimes what I'm really looking for when I'm not kind of actually approaching someone is just when 2 people are having a really nice moment together. The doors of the Persepolis Lounge, which is on Whitaker, were open up onto the street. And so I was walking down the middle of Whitaker because there were all these people out in the middle of the street anyway. And I just happened to glance over, and these 2 people were on a date or something, and just happened to catch a really nice moment between them. This person I met randomly for like 5 minutes, and she told me that she was starting to become a model, and she wanted to show me what her favorite pose was. And this was her favorite pose, and we were kind of somewhere else when she showed me this pose, and I was like, well, come over here to this tattoo window, because I really love the tattoo window. And I just thought the stripes on her shirt really went well with all of the other kind of graphic elements here. I think this might have been from the same night as the Persepolis Lounge, because these people were actually standing like in the middle of Whitaker Street, completely unaware of anything else that was going on. And I just loved that she was wearing this kind of silky gown, and she had this flowing hair, but then she couldn't like put down the phone to kiss this guy. And this is also probably one of my more favorite photos from the series. I think this was on Halloween, and it started to rain. And so all this huge crowd was kind of gathering outside of El Rocco Lounge. And I kind of snuck into this little place right by the side door with this, their logo. And these two people came up and started licking the window, and it was all foggy in there because it was like a big dance party. And the crown just was like perfect on his head. It was a lucky one. And then this guy, also on Halloween, there's a wall right on Broughton Street, the corner of Broughton and Whitaker, I think, and it has this really great texture. He and his friends were walking towards me, and he was just so incredible looking, and I just knew that he would look really great against the texture of that wall. Yeah.
Great, thank you for sharing some of those stories. I'm sure that was really interesting for people to hear kind of how you encountered those moments. There we go. So now I'm going to ask you just a few questions about the projects. I was wondering if you could speak to your experience of going out at night to take photographs for the series. Are you going to a specific bar or night spot, or kind of just wandering around? And how do people react when they see you with that really eye-catching Polaroid camera?
Yeah. Well, you know, back when I started the project in 2012, I was working 2 jobs. I worked at a coffee shop and I worked at a photo lab. And so I didn't have a lot of time to make photos during the day. And so I would bring my camera, and I got the camera at a yard sale randomly for like $2. It was a super sweet yard sale score. So I would take that to work at the coffee shop, and then when I would close down, I'd get off work at like 11 or midnight, and then I'd go downtown with the camera, and stay out till like 3 or 4 if it was a good night, for pictures, which is, you know, it varies, of course. The camera is so great looking, and it's certainly not something you see every day on the street. So a lot of times people would just like come up to me, be like, what are you doing? Take my picture, you know. But other times, you know, I was kind of, especially back then, you know, there were a lot of bars that were all on kind of the Congress Street strip, from Whitaker to MLK. And people would kind of, you know, go from one to the next to the next. And there was this kind of like wave of people going up and down Broughton and Congress. And so I would just kind of like follow that wave and follow to see where people are going or who was out there, and just kind of see what I could find.
Yeah. We've already have one question. I know you mentioned you might have your camera with you. Is that something you have? Sure. People want to see what it looks like.
There we go. So it folds out, and it has a bellows here, and a big flash bar. And the flash is super bright, kind of blinding, but it does what it needs to do to get the right contrast. You know, and one of the things about this project, just like the physicality of it, is like wandering around, and here's the bag that I use. So I'm like wandering around with this big bulky bag, and then the film itself is, you know, in this box, and then it's in a foil package, and you have to open that, and then you have to pull the dark slide out of the film before you take the first shot. And so there's just all this like stuff to kind of juggle physically while I'm trying to engage with the person.
Right.
So that's kind of a big part of just how it all happens, I guess.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting kind of juxtaposition between the spontaneous element that seems like some of your images have versus the whole process of actually getting the camera ready to take it.
Yeah, and I'm like, you know, normally I'm like wandering around. As soon as I pull the film out of the camera, then you have to count to 15, or depending on, you know, different things before you pull the Polaroid apart.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like holding one in my teeth and then taking the next one and then counting and then peeling, and then so it's like it's a whole production.
Kind of like a very pleasing physical process that we don't necessarily get from our iPhone cameras anymore. Well, next I kind of want to ask you about street photography itself. A lot of street photographers go out, and it means that they don't necessarily know what they're going to be, you know, what they're going to find that night. So do you have an idea of what you're looking for? It sounds like you know kind of the areas you frequented to find those people, but how do you know when you found it to take a photo of it, and then what photographers are influencing you and who are you looking at?
Well, I think, you know, knowing when I found it, it's a feeling. And it's hard to explain more than that. You know it when you see it. Something that happens when I'm like walking around looking and kind of just people watching more than anything is like getting almost like into a flow state. So I'm like super hyper focused and very aware of my surroundings, but I'm also kind of just like not really thinking too hard about it, but then it all just kind of happens. It's an interesting thing that happens. But I think also certainly what makes it probably a little easier to manage is being from here and growing up. You know, I didn't grow up like living downtown, but I was downtown all the time as a kid. And so I'm really familiar with the architecture and all these different little like graphic elements that I just admire. And so sometimes I would just like hang out at a certain wall, and if somebody walked by that just looked incredible, I might take the picture right then, or I might stop them and kind of engage with them for a couple minutes. But yeah, I mean, the whole point of street photography is that there is no plan, and you never know what you're gonna run into that night. And that's what's exciting about it.
Yeah, and that speaks a little bit to the photo you were talking about earlier with the girl with the striped shirt and how you knew of that kind of tattoo background that you thought it might work well with. I'm already getting a few questions from people about kind of your engagement with subjects as they are kind of walking by. Do you ask the person if you photograph them before you take it? Is that part of your process?
Yeah, usually we're kind of, you know, talk for a few minutes, and now with the Polaroid camera, I've never had anyone say no. I think the camera is just very attractive. And it's kind of like a special opportunity maybe that a lot of people don't get to have their picture taken with this cool camera. I don't know. A digital SLR, it's a very different interaction. A lot of people are not so into that. But the Polaroid is very seductive, I guess.
You do occasionally take photos of people. You mentioned like the couple in Persepolis Lounge. They wouldn't have known you were taking a photo, but I assume after you took it with the flash.
Yeah, that flash is so bright that sometimes I won't, like a really beautiful moment's happening. I don't want to interrupt that, obviously. That's what I'm kind of searching for. So I will take the picture. That flash is so bright, you know, the people always realize. And normally they're like, hey, you know, I've never had anyone get upset about it or anything. And then sometimes I'll go over and I'll be like, hey, I just took this picture. I hope that's okay. And sometimes if it's a total stranger, I'll be like, well, you know, here's my number and I'll make you a print or whatever. So.
Right. Yeah. It seems like you've made a lot of wonderful connections that way. Strangers who were originally in your photos have become friends or supporters of your work.
Totally.
So, that's great. And then can you speak to maybe some influences? Some people are saying maybe they see Robert Mapplethorpe in your images. I don't know if he's an influence.
Oh, sure. I love Mapplethorpe. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I look at a lot of photos all the time. So I mean, I'm sure I'm pulling stuff kind of subconsciously. But I guess some of my big ones, you know, I mentioned in kind of my project statement. Weegee's amazing and kind of one of the godfathers of street photography. And Jill Freedman. I only more recently, in the last like 5 years maybe, got more familiar with her work, and she's just such an inspirational person. But I also really like a lot of studio photographers. Richard Avedon, I really like his studio work. So like simple. I think that it's really challenging to make a really simple photograph. So especially like for the S&M on Broughton Street, the guy in the leather shorts, that to me, after I took that, I was like, oh, that's kind of like Avedon-y, maybe. I don't know. Who else? Walker Evans, since I was a kid, I'm a big fan of him. His subway portraits, where he would take his camera on the subway and he would hide it under his coat and take pictures of these, you know, ladies with the big hats with the big feathers in the hat. And I mean, those photos are just incredible.
I love that series, and it has a nice connection to Telfair Museum's permanent collection too, because we have so many Helen Levitt photographs.
And Helen Levitt is incredible. Yeah, I have a book for color work right over here.
And she was friends with Evans, and they would go on the subway together. And sometimes I think she served, or from the stories I've read, I don't know if it's true or not, would serve as kind of the distraction while he was taking the photos. So they were a good tag team.
Yeah, and then, you know, I'm really also, I look at a lot of like graphic design and painting, and I'm a big movie fan, and I really love like Hitchcock and Peter Bogdanovich and all kinds of old movies.
Well, that's great. I think also one thing I wanted to talk about was how exciting it is probably for visitors to see Savannah so heavily represented in an exhibition.
Yeah.
Seeing places and faces that they may recognize. So you talked a little bit about how you're familiar with the city. You were born and raised here. So how important is locality, especially the city of Savannah, to your work?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I kind of touched on it earlier. You know, when I was younger, I went to a lot of music shows downtown back in the day. They did all ages music shows at bars a lot. When I was in high school, I was, you know, doing that all the time. Not really taking pictures. I guess I took some pictures of like my friends' bands that were playing there or whatever. But I think, you know, you soak up kind of a lot of ideas and inspiration, and you don't really act on it maybe until later. You know, I also think, you know, there's so many incredible local businesses here, and all these fantastic bars and restaurants and people that are putting everything into that and creating, you know, a community here. That's really inspiring to me and really powerful. So, I mean, I don't think, you know, I wouldn't be taking these pictures if those places hadn't have existed and kind of been the backdrop and the destination for these images and, you know, a lot else. But
right. I think it's really, you know, it's great that you see kind of time in your work from that, you started the series, I think, in 2012. So we're seeing businesses that started last year in these photographs too, and how, the vibe has kind of changed in certain places. And, you have images from downtown, but you also have images from bars that have opened up in Starland.
Yeah, totally. And that's certainly, back in 2012 when I started this, not something I was thinking about, and I never thought I'd be working on this project for 8 years. I mean, I just did not have the foresight for that. But yeah, it's interesting to kind of see the movement of, a lot of places further downtown that aren't there anymore, but now kind of further up more in Starland. So I'm just kind of following wherever the people go. But
yeah, and I think one thing that should be mentioned too that hasn't been is that you're also, Savannah has the, kind of liberal open container law as well. So people being allowed to take their drinks out on the street. You don't have to go into a bar to capture these moments, but people are kind of swarming outside and you're able to make those interactions.
And I think a lot of, obviously the businesses and the indoor shots are really important to the series, but there's so much that happens between places. And like I said before, like wandering, in that wave of people back up and down the strip downtown. Yeah, if we didn't have that to-go cup,
who knows what it would have looked like. So moving on to talk a little bit more about the exhibition itself. This is the largest presentation of your work in an exhibition to date. And as you mentioned in the PowerPoint, it features several original Polaroids, which are not something you show very often, as well as several prints that were made at a larger scale than you usually do. I believe 30 by 24 as opposed to your usual kind of 16 by 20 or 11 by 14. So I wanted to ask if you could speak a little bit to your vision for this exhibition and what you think the viewer will gain from seeing those original Polaroids with the larger scale digital prints.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Polaroid as an object is so important. And I think I'm kind of exploring that in a couple different ways. In the moment of actually shooting, like I was talking about before, like all of the physicality of like carrying all the stuff and counting and pulling and then storing and all of this stuff. And the fact that it creates this like physical object within 15 seconds. Is a big, important factor about that. But then I'm also kind of using the Polaroid almost like you would use a negative to make these enlarged prints. And I've always kind of wanted to make the prints big. Mm-hmm. So this was a really great opportunity to do that. And then I just wanted to kind of show them side by side so you could really understand, where they originated and then where I took them. So.
Yeah, it's really nice to see them at that larger scale and kind of, we talked a little bit about you felt like sometimes it might lose its kind of clarity at that larger scale, but it does allow you to see them in kind of a different way, I think.
Yeah, I mean, some of the figures are almost like closer to life size. And so I feel like, maybe you could kind of feel like you're right there with the person a little bit.
Yeah, bring them on your level.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've had a few questions asking about kind of next projects or how you've been doing during the pandemic. So that's kind of where I wanted to bring this now. So there has been a large kind of cultural shift since you've ended this series and because of our present times. So many people are now avoiding social interactions and those kind of interactions that we see in your photographs. And so I was wondering if you could just take a minute to talk about your experience as an artist during this moment. And how that's changing how you're thinking about your work, and if there's any kind of new projects you're working on.
Yeah, luckily for me, in the first few months of all of the craziness, I had this book to get out and I had this show to produce, and so I was pretty distracted and just had to force myself to focus on those projects. But hopefully, you know, it can be seen right now as a nice look back, you know, and kind of bring back some nice memories for people of nice nights out that they've had. You know, I certainly hope that things can kind of get back to a certain level of comfort and safety here, because the connection, the human connection, is so important. You know, for me personally, and you know, we're very social beings, so you know, I've been thinking a lot about how to deal with this situation for new projects. It's very challenging because for me, so much of my portraiture work is about making a close connection with someone, even if it's just, you know, 5 minutes. So it's challenging.
Right, and we're not asking you to, you know, predict the future.
Yeah.
And I think your photographs do, you know, offer kind of a rumination on those kind of wonderful social interactions that we're used to and love. And I agree that I hope it's not the end of that, and that we'll get back to a place where we can hug each other and have a nice night out. So, and in the meantime, we can look at your photographs and appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I did want to talk a little bit, you mentioned your catalog and how that was a big project you were working on during this time that allowed you to kind of put your energy and force behind that. So this is the first published monograph of your work, and I just wanted you to kind of share a little bit about it and how it kind of complements the exhibition.
Yeah. You know, I think pretty early on in the working on this series, I knew that I wanted to do a book. You know, my dad was a photographer, and he published several books of his work in like the 70s and the 80s. So as a kid, I was, you know, very taken with that, and kind of always fantasized about, oh, maybe one day I could have a book, you know. I think that, you know, seeing the prints really big, how I was saying, and kind of feeling like you're right there in the moment, maybe. The book is kind of the flip side of that, where, you know, you could sit on your couch and kind of get lost, hopefully, into some of these moments, and kind of create your own stories about whatever might have been going on. And I think there's just something really magical about that.
Yeah, that's a really wonderful way to think about it, kind of having a more intimate experience with the books. And you mentioned at some point that the book had 74 or has 74 images in it.
74, 75, yeah.
Yeah, which is, you said, almost the, you know, full collection of the series. And someone else asked earlier how many shots you think you've taken for this series. So I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, you know, so when I first started the project in 2012, I was still working at a photo lab. I could get the film like wholesale, cheaper, whatever. I was paying $8 a box, and there are 10 shots per box. So that was pretty affordable, 80 cents a shot. That's not crazy. The last few boxes that I bought, I paid $80 for one box. So like back in the day when I first started the project, sometimes if it was a really great night and things were just kind of like happening, I'd shoot 60 shots in a night, which was awesome. But then as they got so expensive, I had to be really careful about how many, each one was so precious. And so maybe I would only shoot like 5 or 6 in a night. But over the 8 years, probably shot like 1,000. I don't know. I have them all like in a binder, 2 binders, to just keep them safe. But yeah, I shot a lot of them. Probably I would say like the finished series or whatever is probably about 100 shots.
Okay. That's really interesting. I mean, did it make you change your process at all when you originally had that freedom to kind of take those 60 shots, and then later you're making sure you can only take your one shot or 5 or
Yeah.
6 for the night.
Yeah, and it was tough. I mean, I think, compared to being a digital shooter where you're going out and you're shooting 2,000 pictures, no problem. Even 60 is it really makes you slow down. It makes you think a lot more deeply, I think, about what you're doing. Then to take it down to 5, I mean, it was very challenging, very, very challenging. And there were a lot of, photo moments or whatever that I kind of had to say, well, maybe it's not worth it. And, it's tough.
Yeah, that's a struggle.
Yeah.
Well, I do have one final question before we kind of open it up to everyone in the audience. And I always ask this at the end of the Art 912 talks, which is, what do you hope is the impact of this exhibition on the viewer?
I hope that people can kind of, despite whatever your understanding of photography is, or the technical aspects, I hope people can enjoy seeing all the different ways that the work is presented, from the original Polaroids to the big guys. And, mostly just for me in general, with my portraiture work, I really I hope that people can kind of on the one hand, portraits are a picture of the person, and it's very much about the connection with that very real person. But on the other hand, we project our own perceptions onto people all the time, whether we're aware of that or not. And so hopefully I've given you just enough information in each photo to kind of, so that it serves as a jumping off point for your own imagination of who that person is and what that moment was.
That's a really wonderful way to put it, and also added encouragement for people to go check out the works in person and find those moments where you're kind of discovering your own stories and projections on those works. So thank you so much, Emily, for answering my questions. I really appreciate your thoughtful answers. And I know there have been many questions in the chat. I'm going to try to go back through and look at some of those, but if you want to retype it, if I've missed it, I'll try to get to it there. So someone's asking, when you started the project, how long did you think it would take? And I think you mentioned you weren't sure, but if you wanted to speak to that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started, I knew that I was onto something, but I don't think you can ever really say, oh, I'm gonna be doing this for this amount of time. There's so much, for me, there's so much inspiration in the nightlife here. I could have kept doing this project for 5 more years. At some point, you kind of have to call it, but
when the film runs out.
When the film runs out. Yeah.
When it gets to $80 a box.
Yeah.
Someone was asking how much time you give your subject before taking the shot. So I guess maybe how long they have to stage themselves, or more of a collaboration with you and the subject.
Yeah, normally it's 5 minutes max. And not the whole interaction is maybe 5 minutes. In fact, I normally try to kind of minimize our conversation or our interaction. I really wanted them to kind of present themselves. And even though I might have pulled them out of a situation or approached them to kind of make it happen, I gave them a lot of the control over what they were going to do.
Yeah, and I think of the image with the girl in her favorite pose, she's really kind of staging herself for the camera.
Totally.
In a lot of ways. Someone else was asking how much touch-up is involved in terms of from the original Polaroid to scanning to Photoshop to the final print. So do you want to talk about that process a little more?
Oh, just all the text stuff.
Yeah. I know people are interested in it.
Yeah. So normally I would shoot until 3 or 4 in the morning. Then I'd wake up the next morning, go to the photo lab, scan in all the Polaroids. And I use a flatbed scanner. and I scan them in like as high resolution as I possibly can before the file just gets, you know, unnecessarily humongous. And then, you know, I clean all the dust off of it. I adjust the contrast. Sometimes, you know, I'll do a little bit more than that. And then I just, you know, I have a 44-inch Epson printer, and so I can print all my own work, which is really great at my print shop. And so then I print and mount and do all the framing too.
Great. Another question was asking or noticing something about your work is that you tend to center things a lot. I don't know if that's a conscious choice or just something this one person is noticing in your work. Is that something you think about, is centering the subjects?
I don't know. You know, I think for me, like the different cameras kind of influence how I compose. Maybe that's something to do with it. I'll have to think about that one. I'm not really sure.
And then another person was asking again about kind of Polaroid versus digital camera. And so do you work with a digital camera too for other projects, or kind of why did you choose a Polaroid over a digital camera?
I mean, at the time, I didn't really have a super great digital camera. I'm not really a digital camera person. Sometimes it's the correct tool to use. But I'm more of a film camera person. And I really like the physicality of any type of film, really. I like that it forces you to slow down and that there's not like an endless amount of photos you can take. But more recently, maybe in like the last year, I did get a new digital camera. And so I was kind of going out with that and using like super duper high ISO and no flash, just whatever ambient light there was, which is tough because bars are dark. But that's really cool, and I'm probably gonna play with that a little bit more, hopefully, in the future.
Well, great. I can't wait to see what comes out of that. Exciting. Someone was asking if you have ever thought about photographing in a different location, or if you do have some photographs from other cities. There's one Polaroid of a couple in LA, right?
So no,
it's not always.
The shirt says LA on it.
Oh, does it? Okay.
Yeah, but all the photos in this series are here, from here. It'd be cool to, you know, I'd love to do like a nightlife series somewhere else. I would love to do that. I just think, you know, that would involve me being somewhere else for quite a while to kind of really get into that, which I would love to do. Just so far, haven't had the opportunity. So.
Right. I think your knowledge of Savannah is so kind of integral to this series. That's not saying you can't do it somewhere else, but it would be take a little more time and investment.
Las Vegas would be really fun.
Oh, yeah.
I would love something really like a really crazy place where people are up all night. I would love to do that. But
have you taken your Polaroid camera with you on trips before?
I have, but typically when I travel, I do 35 millimeter. I like 35 millimeter for travel.
A little more feasible.
Yeah, and the Polaroid film is really sensitive to heat. I mean, all film is, but the Polaroid really is. And so if you're like driving in a hot car all day or something, it's just not. It makes me nervous.
Sure, that's understandable. And again, speaking of how expensive that film can be.
Yeah.
So someone mentioned that using white frames seems less common than black. Kind of what was your choice in utilizing white frames instead of black frames for the exhibition?
I feel like I see the white frames more and more.
I see them a lot as well.
Yeah, okay. You know, I'm always really thinking about, you know, compositionally, I'm like looking and making, paying a lot of attention of where my eye is moving when I'm looking at an image. And that helps me know how to edit it or how to compose it better next time or whatever. For me, like a black frame is very distracting. And it kind of almost like takes me out of the work. So
Right, like you don't want your eyes going to something else, but just kind of focusing on the image.
yeah, I'm like, you know, I think it's just how our eyes work, is that I'm like so aware of that black edge that I keep looking at it, and it's so distracting. So I just kind of like to keep you in the image. Yeah,
that's interesting. We've had a lot of questions about if you have to get like releases from people when you photograph them, or how you ask permission to photograph. I think people are really interested in that. And I always think back to Walker Evans' Subway series, where of course he wasn't running after these people and asking them for releases to take photos and publish them. But how do you navigate that?
Well, I mean, you know, luckily I've been able to keep in touch with a lot of the people in the photos. There are certainly some people that I just don't know and have never seen again, and have no idea how to get in touch with them. But you know, everyone that I'm aware of that we've spoken is pleased to be represented, I think. I hope. So I mean, I feel pretty good about that. Model releases, I don't really do. If this was more of a, you know, like a fashion shoot or something like that, I would certainly do that then. But.
Yeah, it sounds like you know, make best efforts to inform people, or they usually know when their photographs are being taken.
Absolutely.
I think people, you know, are also just hyper aware of how we're constantly being on film or, you know, videotaped, or kind of thinking how we're always under surveillance in this modern world. But yours are definitely more of a collaboration or an artistic venture.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, like, if someone was like, no, I don't want you to take my picture, I would not take that picture.
Right.
So.
Someone was asking actually for specific stories about a few of the works, saying that their favorites in the exhibition were I Saw Him Standing There and The Fire Twirler, and if you had any stories about those.
Oh, so I Saw Him Standing There. It's kind of like a dorky riff off of a Beatles song. Yeah, that was, I think it was on Halloween. I would always go out on Halloween and New Year's Eve, and actually like Christmas Eve. A lot of people go out on Christmas Eve, apparently. So I have a lot of Halloween shots. Yeah, he was just standing over there, and he had a couple friends with him, and I walked by, and I was just like, I'm sorry to interrupt you guys, but hi, you're amazing, and can I take a picture of you? And he was like, yeah. And, you know, very brief interaction. And then the fire blower, she's like an old friend of mine. We were at like a big warehouse, and she brought, I think she was using like a combination of coconut oil and 151 or some strange flammable concoction, and blowing these giant fireballs. It was pretty cool, and very tough to get a Polaroid of that. So I did take a couple to get that one.
And so she was performing for the camera, or she was just out there?
She was just out there, just kind of doing her thing, and it was incredible.
That sounds amazing. I will say you have some really fun titles in the exhibition that are like a little descriptive, so you get a sense of what might have happened, but always leave you like wanting to know a little bit more.
Yeah, titling things is like really hard, but I try to, you know, make it interesting.
Do you have a favorite title of any work you've ever done?
Oh God, I don't know.
Yeah, that's Didn't know if one would come to mind immediately. There are some good ones. I encourage people to check out all the labels. Susan Earl, is that your mother?
Mom.
Is asking what's the most risque photo you've ever taken in the series.
Oh, Mom. Risque. You know, I think the S&M on Broughton Street is a pretty risque one. His outfit and kind of his attitude, certainly. Let me think, what else? I really like one of the more recent ones, in the Lone Wolf. There was this couple like making out in one of the booths. And I really like that one. And then they have that wallpaper there. So it's like these giant leaves, kind of like this jungle behind them, wallpaper. Yeah, I feel like those are kind of some of the more risque ones.
Yeah, and I feel like, I mean, I mentioned this a little bit in the introduction, but there's like a softness to your images too. And also sometimes the flash is kind of reflecting in a way that, you know, creates interesting kind of intimacy with the photographs. So I feel like it's, yeah, again, that kind of sensuality kind of comes through the medium that you're using too. So, are there more questions? We have about 9 minutes left in the program. So someone was asking, I mean, I guess they were asking you to comment on color. You've used color photography occasionally, right, in some other series?
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's so funny. A lot of people, if they see some other work that I've done that's in color, they're like, oh my God, it's in color. I thought you only do black and white. I do both.
Go check it out on the website. She's got a website, guys.
I certainly have a love for black and white. And back in the day, I did a lot of darkroom stuff. And you know, my mom was a really brilliant black and white portrait photographer back in the day. But yeah, I shoot a lot of color also. For a while, I went through a big Holga phase, which is like a really like a plastic medium format camera that costs like $50. And it has all these types of like light leaks and stuff. And I would shoot a lot of color film with that. That was really fun because you get like these red streaks of light or blue streaks, and
that sounds really interesting. Someone was asking, let's see, you've mentioned historical influences on your work. Are there contemporary artists that you're looking to for inspiration?
Oh man, yeah. I look at so much stuff. Recently, somebody that I'm just really blown away by, what is his name? Dustin Theory, I think. I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name. He's in the Netherlands. He's doing this whole like ballroom scene portraiture. Gorgeous work, and he does black and white with the flash. And you know, I didn't see his work until a little more recently, and then I was like, oh my God, we kind of have a very similar sensibility, I think. His work is just really incredible, so I've really been enjoying getting to see his stuff. And Bastian Woot, I think he's also from the Netherlands. He does more studio work than anything. Really simple, black and white also, portraits. And sometimes it's not about the person's face at all. It's just about the kind of the space that they take up in the frame and all these different shapes. They'll wear these big, beautiful hats and all this stuff. Really gorgeous work.
Do you find you have a particular way of discovering new photographers? Like, are you kind of actively looking at what other people are doing? Are you looking on Instagram? How are you discovering new work?
Yeah, I look on Instagram and a lot for just to look at images. And I don't know, other photo books. You know, I subscribe to like some photo newsletters and things like that, and just kind of try to pay attention to, you know, what's happening at other galleries and museums. And I mean, I try and pay attention to that for my work and for my work at the studio. So yeah, I'm just kind of looking all over the place.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, trying to just stay on the pulse of what's going on is so important. And it's interesting too, because I feel like we're in such a digital moment where I am getting most of my information from Instagram about art, but I do want to emphasize how exciting it is to see kind of the real works in person. So that's why I'm so excited. The museum is back open, and you can go to the Jepson Center and you can see these prints on the wall. So I'll have to be sure to go check it out. We're coming up on time, but we still, let's see, have a few more questions. Did you learn anything through the process of putting together your first monograph? Do you have any advice for someone who wants to publish a photo book?
Oh man. Yeah, I learned so much from putting this show together and from working on the book. You know, I think a big thing for me, and what I think about a lot just in general anyway, is all the different formats to show your work. Digitally, on Instagram, on a website, on a wall, in a book. You know, just kind of, it's a new way of looking, it's a new way of experiencing. Thinking about sequencing is very different when you're thinking about laying out a book. Yeah, a huge learning experience for me, but I'm really pleased with how it came out.
Yeah, I think the sequencing in the book is really incredible. The images kind of lead very organically into one another.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I spent a lot of time thinking about that, and I was kind of trying to, like, you know, start out a little quiet and then have it like come up to like a crazy
Crescendo.
kind of come back down. So hopefully that translates, whether you're kind of aware of it or not as you're flipping through. But
I mean, do you have like a favorite way of viewing your work? Is it that kind of instant moment where you have the Polaroid? Is it seeing it on the wall in the white frame? Is it looking at it in a book? Or you feel like it's all like an important but different way to experience it?
yeah, I mean, I think I get a lot out of all the different ways. For me, I think when I'm really like getting familiar with a new image that I've just taken, it's when I'm like in my studio alone and editing, you know, looking at it like zoomed in on the computer. That for me is like the way to experience it. But you know, that's just for me, I guess, because no one else is going to be doing that. But that's my favorite.
But we get to experience it in a wonderful but different way. Well, we're coming to the end of the artist talk. Telfair has posted that we have another virtual lecture upcoming on September 17th. So I hope you all tune in for that. And if you log out of this program, you'll be given a link to a survey. So we'd love if you could give us some feedback if you like this format, if you enjoyed the talk. We loved having you here. It's really fun to be able to kind of be all together and see the comments in the chat. And I really thank you all for, you know, spending your Thursday night with us.